Hi, I'm Jeff Weisenberger, the senior editor of Modern Steel Construction. I want to thank everybody for listening in to our monthly podcast series. My guest this time around is Lou Geschwindner, who is a professor emeritus in architectural engineering at Penn State University, also a senior consultant with Providence Engineering Corporation and a former VP here at AISC, a vice president of engineering and research, and is of course involved with our committee on specifications as the chair of the task committee on member design. Lou, thank you very much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Excellent. So one of the questions I have was, I always ask this of anybody who's working in the buildings realm. Way back in the day, was there a specific building or were there certain buildings that you looked at and you said, that's what I want to do. This is what got me into buildings.
The thing that probably had the most influence on me in the beginning was Mies van der Rohe and the architecture in Chicago. I had initially planned to go to IIT, and that was because of Mies van der Rohe and what I saw there. Turned out I was accepted at IIT, but I didn't go to IIT. I ended up going to Rensselaer, and I was in architecture, and along the way, they do evaluations, and their evaluation and my evaluation, and I realized that I really didn't think like an architect. I thought like an engineer. I got my work done and then I was done. I didn't continually revise it all night long, so I didn't pull all-nighters like my classmates.
Sure.
That kind of thing.
So you taught at Penn State for, was it just about 40 years or exactly
about
40
that.
years? Okay. What was the time period, if I may ask?
Well, I started in 1967.
Okay.
And then I didn't really stop when I became vice president of engineering. I was still teaching at Penn State, and I did my vice president's position.
Okay.
From there.
Gotcha.
So I continued to teach until into 2000s.
Starting back in the 60s up until the early 2000s, we like to separate people into generations. That seems to be what happens nowadays, because we always want to talk about how to get the generations to talk. And the greatest generation, the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, where I'm from, the millennials, and so on. Did you really pick up on any distinct differences between the generations?
I don't think I saw the distinct differences that I would say, well, this generation does this and this generation does that. Are the students today different than they were in 1967? Absolutely. But a lot of that is because of what we have available to us today.
Sure.
Students in 1967, if they wanted to present a drawing, had to actually do a drawing.
Yep.
Right? We talk about slides. One of the first things that I did as an undergraduate student working for a faculty member was taking photographs out of magazines and books for him to use in his lectures. It wasn't too long ago, I had a student who was doing a project at Penn State on the football stadium, and I said, I can get you some slides. So I got her a whole carousel full of slides on what she was working on, and she had no idea what they were. What do you do with these little things? Holding
These
them
should
up
be in a
to
museum.
the light. Yeah, exactly. So you see that kind of thing.
Sure.
And the students today, they can use their tablet or their iPad. They can take notes on it. They take pictures of the screen. I go to Steel Conference and I see all sorts of people taking photographs of the screen as their way of taking notes.
It's an easy way to do it.
So yeah, all of that has changed.
Let's go back then to the 60s, and you are a new professor at Penn State. What can you tell me a little bit about the experience of having to get up in front of a group, not as a student anymore, but now you're the professor, getting up in front of a group of students for the first time?
I actually don't remember much about that, but I can tell you that when I was in grade school and high school, there is no way I perceived that I would be somebody in front of a class. Okay, I had more than my share of difficulties in an academic sense. But what I found as an undergraduate student in architecture who enjoyed structures was that I could help my classmates to understand the principles that we were studying. And that is what got me to the point where I wanted to teach, because I found that by helping my classmates learn the material, I learned it better.
That's true.
And so when I first got to Penn State, it was just sort of an extension of what I had been doing as an undergraduate student with my classmates. It was helping the students to learn. It was just something that seemed to be the right thing and flow for me.
Very good. So you're a professor emeritus now. What does a professor emeritus do?
Anything he wants to. I mean, the whole idea from a university perspective is you give a rank that allows that faculty member to maintain a connection to the school.
Sure.
And that is then to benefit the school. There's a connection. There's an emeritus faculty member is someone who has made it through in their profession and has some academic standing that the university wants to maintain a connection with. It allows me to go back. If I wanted to go back and teach a class, I could. If I wanted to go back and work on a PhD committee or any other graduate committees, I could do those kinds of things. But the reality is I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have to do anything, or I can do everything.
Sure. Okay, excellent. Okay, well, since we're still talking about Penn State, and I gotta ask, what do you think of James Franklin as a football coach?
Well, I don't know that much about coaching football. I've always said that I would not want to be asked to take my students out every Saturday and prove what I taught them that week.
Oh, right.
And that's kind of how I look at coaches. They're called every week to prove that they taught those kids something
right
that week. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. What I see is I like his perspective on things. I think he's got a Penn State attitude in terms of academics and what's right. So I'm happy with him, but I watch football games on television. I don't go to them. But I think Penn State is successful under him right now, and I think we should be happy to have him.
Very good. So over the years, obviously, and still to this day, you've been providing plenty of guidance for people who want to become engineers or learn how to become better engineers. So as a professor, do you have advice for anybody who's interested in getting into academia, or is your advice don't?
My advice is not don't, but my advice is to make sure that the academic position that you look for and that you accept is one that is consistent with your approach to what you want to do. If you go to a university that is primarily interested in research, then you better be primarily interested in research.
Right.
It does not make any sense for someone whose main interest is teaching undergraduate schools to pursue a position that's going to require them to do research. It can only lead to unhappy people.
Sure.
And by the same token, if you think you are going to be the world's greatest researcher, don't find some small community college that has only opportunities for you to teach. You've got to try and balance your interest and the interest of the institution. I love teaching. I walk to work every day, 20-minute walk. And I often would think, if I wasn't teaching, what would I want to do? And I could never think of anything I would rather be doing than the teaching. I just loved doing it. And that's frankly why I continue to do continuing education with AISC, because I really enjoy teaching. I enjoy trying to make complicated things understandable. And I enjoy working with students, whether they're, college age, young college age, or academic or professionals who've been working for years.
Sure.
If you can help somebody understand something, you've really made a contribution.
Excellent. But it sounds like you are doing something besides teaching now. You're in the consulting world, so to speak, and you've worked with the specification, and you helped write the book. You've also taught a lot of people over the years, and again are continuing to do so. So tell me a little bit about the consulting and what is it like to put all this knowledge that you've taught to others into practice?
Well, the interesting thing about the consulting is that I'm really not doing any work. I'm senior consultant, but I do not have job production responsibility. I work on my things, which are primarily AISC things, but I'm there if they have questions. So if one of the members of the company has a question primarily about steel design, because that's both what I know best and what I have the best connections for, they'll contact me and we'll talk about the problem, and either I'll help them come up with a solution, or I'll be able to contact someone who might have a better solution. I always told my former students back, much younger, but when they would say, well, when you retire, you can come work for me, I would say, you can't afford me. Not because you couldn't pay me, but because I don't know how to get any answers quickly. I do everything the long way, the way I would teach it. And so as a professional, you've got to get to the answer. You've got to understand what the problem is, come up with the solution, and get to the answer without deriving every single equation.
Right.
But when you need to know, where did that equation come from, and why am I not getting the answer that's in the manual, which one of us is wrong, I can help people understand, okay, this is what you're supposed to be doing, this is what you don't understand about it. And so again, it's a teaching thing. So my role is very much a teaching role with the company.
Sure. Okay, well, switching away from education and work a little bit, I just want to talk about some of your interests, and I do understand that you enjoy reading biographies, and I was wondering if there were any specific people or stories that you've come across that have been particularly inspiring, whether it comes to your work or anything else.
The one book that I read that I wanted to recommend to my grandchildren to read is Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation.
Sure.
And the reason is because it helped me to understand my father. And not that he was hard to understand, but as I read that book, I could see the kinds of things that my dad and his brothers and his sisters and my mother's family, you could see how they approach things. It helped to understand that whole group of people. Sure. And since I have an interest in genealogy and in family, I really want my grandkids to read that so that will help them understand their great-grandfather. Because
sure.
I think everybody ought to read that and understand what the culture of service was with those people, how they gave so much for our country.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of genealogy, it sounds like that's another interest of yours.
Yeah, it is. It's something that had a long-term interest in. Certainly, the computer has helped that tremendously. I had an uncle who was very, very much interested in it, but never able to make much progress. So he had all of the living family and the recent history pretty well put together. So we've been able to go back, and now we have the Geschwindner family back to the 1500s in Steinau, Germany.
Okay, just out of curiosity then, going back to the 1500s on both sides, any surprising or interesting discoveries there?
Well, I would say the most interesting thing is that in Steinau, Germany, the Geschwindners were masons and built the wall around the city.
Okay.
And in England, my mother's family, the Letters, were bricklayers. And I just have found that so interesting, that how that has
I would say so.
carried through. Now, I knew how my father became a mason because I knew that his father-in-law was a mason, and so that all connected. But taking it back multiple generations was just a very interesting thing to me.
That is pretty amazing. Well, and speaking of genealogy, and one question I had was of your three daughters. It is three daughters, correct?
Right, three daughters.
So one of the questions was, did any of them follow you into architectural engineering or anything remotely related? It sounds like one of them did.
Yeah, my oldest daughter is an architectural engineering graduate. She was one of my students.
Okay. And
her husband was one of the students in that same class. So, and that David's got Providence Engineering,
Okay.
with offices all across the state of Pennsylvania. So they have. As far as grandkids, we're not quite sure yet. Have at least the youngest of the 9 grandkids looks like she might become an engineer of some kind. Got a couple of other ones that are a few years older than her that may, but we're not really sure yet what they're going to go. Which is interesting to think that the youngest one, who is in 6th grade, is very much looks like an engineer at this stage, whereas the ones that are juniors in high school we're not sure about yet.
Sure. I'm sorry. How many grandkids?
We have 9 grandkids.
9 grandkids. What's the age range?
The youngest one is in 6th grade, and the oldest one has been a graduate of Penn State for a year and a half.
Oh, okay.
So
excellent. All right. What do your grandkids think of your mustache?
Well, they haven't known me. In fact, none of my kids or my grandkids have known me without the mustache.
Sure.
I think they like it to the extent that they would think anything about it. I have a picture. One Thanksgiving, when they were much younger, they all came with fake mustaches and put on fake mustaches.
Perfect.
So we have a photograph of all of us sitting on the couch.
I want to see this picture.
Yeah, I'll have to look for that with fake mustaches. But you know, it's one of those things that it's just there. I never thought too much about it, but my one grandfather had a mustache, a very small one, but he had a mustache, and I'm not sure I ever saw it. You know, it was just always there.
Right.
And so that was him. So there was
just part of him.
Yeah, there was no thinking about it.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I believe I've heard the origin story, and it has something to do with when your first daughter was born. But so a question was, you know, did it ever get to a point where you said, "My gosh, I've had it so long, I can't get rid of it anymore. I'd be letting people down. It's become a part of me now."
I don't know about letting people down, but I would not have any interest in getting rid of it. Never have. I don't know why. My brother also has a handlebar mustache. He's 5 years younger than me, and I started, and the first time I saw him when I went back home to New Jersey, he had one also, which really, really shocked both of us. He has shaved his a couple times, shaved it off, grew it back, but I have never thought about doing that. Now, I do recognize that it makes me stand out, and that, I suppose, is part of why you do it.
Sure.
You know, I when I was teaching, I wore wild ties.
Right. I've heard about the wild ties.
I never went to class without a wild tie on. Wore a different tie every day of the academic year. So sort of standing out just seemed to be the way to sort of break the ice with the students, and you know,
sure.
How can you be too standoffish with a guy who's wearing wild ties and a handlebar mustache? You know, he's got to be
put some at ease a little bit,
to.
right?
Yeah.
Well, that's excellent. I just one more question. We had talked a little bit beforehand about model trains.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about model trains. Is this a lifelong obsession or something a little bit more recent?
It's sort of more recent to the extent that I've been doing it. I had trains when I was a kid, but I never did much about it. But about 20 years ago, some things changed, some opportunities came about to get a few new pieces, and I just started accumulating trains, and they're O gauge, they're line L type trains,
sure.
And you know, have a table in the basement, set it up. And
I always forget. I know the gauges are different sizes, but about what size is an O?
O gauge is the 3-track one.
Okay.
A 3-rail one rather, which is a couple inches apart.
Okay.
But I also have a garden railroad, which is one outside, which is a little bit bigger, and so that runs around the garden. But it's just something to play with. It's just kind of fun stuff.
We all need that, though.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Lou, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. All right.
Happy to be here.
Thanks a lot.